Welcome back to the 85th online episode of Peacetime, hosted every Sunday morning by Peace Point with myself, Phra Nicholas Thanissaro, coming to you today from DIMC in Azusa, California. In the previous session, we looked at the Kukra Jataka, and today we continue on our journey through an anthology of the most important suttas from the Buddhist scriptures to look at the Payasi Sutta. I estimate today's session will run to about an hour and 10 minutes with a 30-minute break halfway through for some meditation. So as usual with our chosen sutta, we will work our way through the sequence of sources, sutta name meaning, interlocutors, place names and timing, backstory and overview before looking at the main body of the manuscript itself, the outcome of the teaching, and some of the issues the sutta raises. So this time we are returning to one of the longer suttas in the form of what's known as the Payasi Sutta. It is referenced D2316 or DN23. Today we'll be using Maurice Walsh's Wisdom Publications translation. For interpretation of the sutta, I have referred to the Venerable Detatua's 2003 book, Khao Bai Yu Ne Chai, and also Pia Tan's Dhamma summary. Furthermore, one contemporary scholar, Stephen A. Evans, has explored the Payasi Sutta, interpreting it as a polemic against scientific or empirical attacks on the core Buddhist concepts of karma and rebirth. So it explains why it is inappropriate to look for proof for spiritual values, moral categories, and intuitive realities by empirical means. The reason it's called the Payasi Sutta is that it's addressed to a certain prince who is called Payasi. So the Payasi Sutta means literally the discourse to Payasi. So turning to the people who appear in the sutta, first we have Payasi, who is a prince or chieftain, in the Pali termed Rajanya, delegated to govern a certain outlying town by King Pasenadi of Kosala. King Pasenadi was, like King Bimbisara, who we met in the Samanyapala Sutta, one of the Buddha's main royal supporters. But Prince Payasi was rather less faithful than Pasenadi. Although he had a strong interest in spiritual matters, he also had a lot of wrong beliefs and a very negative worldview. Payasi believes that there is no world other than this, no fruit of actions, and no rebirth. In other words, he rejected the notions of karma and rebirth, two basic Buddhist teachings. Payasi was probably still young and had not personally met with the Buddha during his lifetime. He rejected the Cartesian dualist account of the body-mind relationship. Payasi was rather like a proto-scientist on account of his various lines of argument and purported experiments. After his death, he gets to return as a low-level angel called Serisaka. As for his debating partner, this was an elder monk called Kumara Kassapa. He was one of the enlightened disciples of the Buddha who was very well known for his ability to explain things in detail, and was especially good in dialogue with others. Wherever he went, people would flock to hear his teachings because often he could explain things in detail which they'd only heard in brief from the Buddha. In fact, Kumara Kassapa was very much born to be. His mother was a nun, which might sound like a bit of an impossibility. How could nuns have children? Well, some women were married before they became nuns. In this particular case, having failed to obtain her parents' consent to become a nun, Kumara Kassapa's mother married, and only later, with her husband's consent, was she able to join the order, not knowing that she was already with child. But after a short time it started to show, and if she had conceived as a nun, then she would get kicked out of the monkhood. And again we meet with the personage of Devadatta, who you will remember from the Samanyapala Sutta. Usually he said everything that was contrary to good sense. He advised, oh, you don't need to wait to find out how this nun got pregnant, just throw her out of the order. By contrast, the Buddha wasn't rash in his decision-making. He entrusted the matter to Ubali, who advised, no, we are going to form a committee to give an opinion about this, and more importantly, we're going to wait until the full term of the pregnancy, and then by counting backwards, we will know when the baby was conceived. In good time, we will know whether she is guilty of a transgression of the monastic rules or not. It turned out that the length of time between the birth of the baby and her ordination was less than the 9 months, or 10 months as it was in those days, so she cleared her name. Her baby, Kumara Kassapa, was adopted by a prince and grew up in the royal palace. His mother later attained enlightenment, so Kumara Kassapa was the child of a subsequently enlightened nun. Gawampati was a post-Buddha enlightened monk who was as gifted in mental powers as the Venerable Mahamoggallana had been before him. Uttara the Brahmin was Prince Piyasi's attendant in charge of giving alms to the monks on the prince's behalf, and was later reborn as an angel called Uttara in the second level of heaven. Moving on to place names, the sutta was given at Setavia, Kosala, in a Simsapa or rosewood forest. In terms of timing, it occurred just after the Buddha's parinibbana and the distribution of his relics. According to the Vimalawatu commentary, the events took place just before the rains retreat when the first council was held in Rajagaha, which raised the question why, if the sutta was given after the time of the Buddha, it is still retained in the Theravada Buddhist scriptures. It's very likely the story was actually told by the Council of Elders, not necessarily those running the first council, but with the objective to encourage the post-Buddha laity to be disciplined and generous in their support of the monastic order. Without the personal charisma of the Buddha, the monastics at the time would probably have had to find a new source for faith or a way to inspire the supporters in the laity to support the Sangha in the Buddha's absence. That is, especially to talk about the importance of the doctrines of karma and rebirth. More specifically, as related at the end of the sutta, any kind of generosity directed at the Sangha, even without the Buddha still alive, brings heavenly rebirth for the supporter, and refined gifts to the Sangha bring a yet higher heavenly rebirth. Though Prince Piyasi had an interest in many spiritual things, he was entangled in wrong views because he had made some attempts to do what in those days might be considered scientific experiments, and he had come to the conclusion that when people die, then that is the end of the story. It's not that Prince Piyasi hadn't tried to believe in metaphysical phenomena, but rather like an empiricist or a scientist in the present day, he didn't believe in anything without empirical proof. Since matters of death and the afterlife enter the domain of metaphysics, even with modern technology, such issues are hard to research in a satisfactory way by empirical means. If you want to conduct an experiment on destinations after death, and you want incontrovertible proof, then you have to die for yourself to know for sure. Generally speaking, the methodology of science is not very well suited to the subject matter which concerns people's subjective experience, especially when the things you experience are very difficult to share with other people. You can't just fill in a survey. You can't replicate the experiment independently, and it's not verifiable by other people. Scientific proof requires a statistical significance of at least 0.05, which means phenomena need to happen 95% of the time. Supposing 95% of people who meditate become happier as a result, then it would be scientific proof of the efficacy of meditation. Even so, you may not be able to say what happened during the meditation, but you can talk about the results from the point of view of a change in survey-filling behavior. However, for matters of life and death, then you can come up against a whole lot of additional problems. It's not that there's never been research done on the experiences of the dying. The experience of those reporting near-death experiences involve overwhelming numbers, but still it is a body of evidence which scientists have had to leave unexplained or treat as an outlier. However, from the account of Prince Piyasi, it would appear that he was not afraid to try to apply scientific methodology to metaphysical issues. And he also wasn't constrained by ethical standards for humane clinical research either, a little bit like the illegal experimentation conducted in the Second World War in concentration camps. So turning to paragraph 1, Kumara Kassapa happened to be passing through the fiefdom where Prince Piyasi governed. When Prince Piyasi looked out of his castle window, and saw the people flocking to hear teaching from Kumarakassapa, he too wanted to debate spiritual teachings. He had a lot of questions on his mind which he'd been saving up already for a long time, about things concerning right and wrong view. Payasi meets with the elder Kumarakassapa, who is staying at the Simsapa forest outside Setavia, and proceeds to debate about Payasi's worldviews. So before we go any further, it is important to define what is meant by right and wrong views in Buddhism. A set of 10 specific views is derived from the Apanaka Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya. Sadly, these ended up as no more than a footnote in Paul Fuller's 2004 book of the 250 pages about the notion of ditthi in Theravada Buddhism. Fortunately for successful spiritual practice, our main teacher in Thailand, the Venerable Tachiwo, drew particular attention to these 10 in his book Kalpa Yune Jai, which I will summarize now so that you know what you're looking for. First category relates to views concerning sharing, where right view means believing that generosity is fruitful, namely in releasing the giver from the clutches of stinginess and selfishness. Having such a core value about the world reinforces the mutual compassion between the giver and the receiver. Second category relates to views concerning welfare work, where right view means believing that social welfare is fruitful, which will help to release the giver further from the clutches of greed. Having such a core value about the world widens one's compassion towards one's fellow man. The third category relates to views concerning the honoring of virtue, where right view means believing that respecting those worthy of respect is fruitful, which will help recognize and celebrate those who exemplify good behavior in society. Fourth category relates to views concerning the outcome of good and bad deeds a person has done, where right view means believing our choices and actions count for something, namely, that sooner or later the consequence of the actions we have done will catch up with us for sure. If the actions have been unwholesome, then so will be the consequences. If the actions have been wholesome, then so will be the consequences. The fifth category relates to views concerning the reality of the present existence, where right view means believing that this world exists, or this world is of great benefit because the world is eminently suitable for cultivating good deeds. However, our time in the world is limited, therefore, we need to use our time to the full, intelligently and efficiently, in order to make the most of our lives. The sixth category relates to views concerning the world to come, where right view means believing that there is an afterlife, or to put it another way, death is not the end of the story. The quality of our existence in the world to come depends on the good and bad karma we have done ourselves, chiefly in our present existence, so that no one can afford to behave recklessly during their life. The seventh category relates to views concerning our debt of gratitude to our mother, where right view means believing that a mother exists, or we have a debt of gratitude to our mother for her virtues towards us. Consequently, we ought to take all available opportunities to repay our debt of gratitude to our mother. The eighth category relates to views concerning our debt of gratitude to our father, where right view means believing that a father exists, or we have a debt of gratitude to our father in just the same way that we have a debt of gratitude to our mother. The ninth category relates to views concerning spontaneously arising beings, where right view means believing that spontaneous arising exists, or beings outside the human and animal realms are a very real possibility for our future rebirth in realms beyond what meets the naked eye. The 10th and last category relates to views concerning the existence of wise enlightened ones, where right view means believing that wise enlightened ones exist, or those who have attained Buddhahood or arahantship exist. Such people are able to have meditational insight into the reality of this world and the next through their own earnest striving, and through compassion have shared their insights with less perceptive beings. The reason why the Buddha selected this particular set of worldviews is that if your outlook on the world corresponds with these, then you entertain the possibility in your mind that practicing and training your mind will lead to some sort of progress and self-improvement. But if you deny the efficacy of, let's say, mental practice, or the goodness of others around you, for the goodness of actions at all, then what's the point of even trying? You may as well just go lie down in a forest somewhere and wait for your expiry date. So right view is the basis upon which the whole of our spiritual practice is founded. If a person doesn't have right view, then the outlook they have on the world is one which basically denies the point of even trying to train yourself spiritually. And we'll see now how this is connected with the sutta that we are studying today. So an overview of the arguments which Payasi used to defend his worldview were 10 in all. At the beginning, he denied the existence of other non-human worlds. Then he went on to insist that no one who had died and purportedly gone to hell, the first or second level of heaven, had ever returned. He tried to deny the testimony of those endowed with the divine eye. He questioned why good people don't commit suicide to go to heaven faster. He questioned why life force cannot be seen or weighed. He searched for the seat of the soul in living and deceased bodies. Finally, he suffered from extreme dogmatic intransigence. To dismantle Prince Payasi's wrong views, Kumarakassapa deployed refutations in 10 stages, running to a total of 15 parables in all. When Prince Payasi went to visit Kumarakassapa, the first thing he did was to state his wrong view that, and here we're looking at paragraph 5, he says, there is no other world, there is no spontaneously born beings, there is no fruit or result of good or evil deeds. So in refutation, Kumarakassapa asked Payasi, in further down the same paragraph, whether he believed in the existence of other worlds, as in places outside of what you can see with the naked eye. So he was asking if the prince believed in anything apart from the human and animal realms. The Prince Payasi responded that he didn't. So just to start off with, Kumarakassapa asked, well, what about the sun and the moon? Those are not human worlds, but are they not worlds that you believe in? So immediately he was setting himself up to deconstruct the argument by putting Prince Payasi on the philosophical back foot. Next, Prince Payasi continued with a second argument, saying, but I have reasons not to believe in the existence of the hell realms. So Kumarakassapa asked, and here we're looking at paragraph 6, what proof do you have that hell doesn't exist? Payasi said, well, I have conducted a certain experiment whereby whenever I hear in my kingdom that a particularly wicked person is on their deathbed, I will go and visit them and get them to promise me that when they get to where they're going, and for sure they'd be going on their way to a hell realm, if such a place existed when they got there, that they come back and tell me about it. So far, I've told lots of people to do this, and not a single one of them has ever come back to tell me about it. So this proves that hell doesn't really exist. It's just a figment of all those spiritual priests' imagination, and there's nothing for us to worry about. Well, what would you think about that? Did Prince Payasi get a large enough sample for a 0.05 statistical significance? And turning to paragraph 7, Kumarakassapa was not fazed by Payasi's argument. As a refutation, he presented a parable about an executioner. So, an executioner oversees a prisoner who has been sentenced to death for a life of crime. And now he is approaching the day of his execution. So just as he's being paraded around the town on his way to the gallows or the guillotine, supposing the prisoner said to the executioner, hang on a minute, just before I have my head chopped off, I just want to say goodbye to some of my relatives who I'd forgotten about. Do you think the executioner would just fit in with an ankle monitor and give him half a day of compassionate leave? Generally, executioners don't trust death row prisoners to come back dutifully from home leave. Any excuse the condemned prisoner has only adds to everyone's suspicion that they're going to do a runner. In the same way, if a person has died and falls into the hell realms, they may not have executioners to look after them, but they do have a whole lot of very different looking characters, usually in red loincloths with bulging eyes and curly hair. However, they would have the same attitude as the executioner, that they don't let anyone out of their sight until they've had their karmic retribution expiated. So not all the variables have been controlled for in this experiment, certainly not enough to draw any conclusion from about whether hell really exists or not. So Prince Payasi pivots to embark on his third argument, that is, that the first level of heaven doesn't exist. Again, Prince Bayasi cites scientific proof, which in this case is research data that he has collected himself. Whenever any people of relatively good conduct are on their deathbed in his kingdom, so these are the people who maybe didn't keep the 5 precepts all their life, but they didn't really do anything bad. So here we're looking at paragraph 8. So those with the expectations that when they die, they ought to go to some sort of better place, but maybe not a particularly good place, somewhere like the first level of heaven, which is known as Jatu Maharajika. He would whisper in their ear as they were dying that, if heaven really exists, please come back and tell me about it. So after telling a few hundred people to get his significant sample size and extracting a deathbed promise, he waited for a reasonable length of time, but not a single person came back to visit him, not even visitations in his dreams. Consequently, he came to the conclusion that, just like hell, the first level of heaven must just be a myth made up by monks who want to trick their congregations into spending their lives doing good deeds. So turning to paragraph 9, in refutation, Kumarakaspa gives a parable to illustrate the real nature of heaven for the people who, even though they might have wanted to come back to tell Prince Bayasi all about it, failed to do so. The parable in this case was a parable of a person who had been rescued having fallen in a cesspool. The cesspool in this case being compared to the human realm, so a nasty, dirty place with an unpleasant odor, which if you can manage to escape into a beautiful existence, which is that of the heaven realm, the likelihood of willingly returning to that nasty, smelly human place is very unlikely. So for anyone finding it hard to imagine this, you might think of the scene in the 2008 movie Slumdog Millionaire. Just as a person who has fallen in a cesspool has been helped out by their friends and has been washed, scrubbed down, perfumed, and given a new set of clothes, it isn't very likely for them to want to climb back into the cesspool again for the sole purpose of telling Prince Bayasi how nice it is once you get out of it. So in Buddhism, any angels would definitely have to hold their nose to revisit the human realm, and generally they would not come back at all unless there is a prospect of gaining very serious merit as a result of their return. Consequently, Prince Bayasi pivots to argue the non-existence of the second level of heaven. The second level of heaven, known as Daodingsa, is a place where you need to have kept the 5 precepts in order to get there. Again, Prince Bayasi cites scientific proof, which in this case is research he's conducted himself. Whenever any people established in the 5 precepts were on their deathbed in his kingdom, so here we turn to paragraph 10, he had got them to promise him to come back and tell him if the second level of heaven existed. But since no single person returned from their second level of heaven, Prince Bayasi concluded that such a heaven realm was nothing more than a myth. So here we turn to paragraph 11. Kumarakaspa again has his parable for the prince who makes return visits problematic, which in this case is a thing about relative timescales, as 1 day and 1 night in the second level of heaven is equal to 100 years in the human realm. So if a new angel was a little bit forgetful and forgot Prince Bayasi overnight, then Prince Bayasi would already have passed away because a century would have passed in the human realm. It's almost like the human realm is at the center of a spinning wheel, but that all the other heavens and hells are at the rim of the wheel, which are spinning in time at a much faster rate. Kumarakaspa continued by explaining why conclusions about the heaven realms are impossible to make unless one has attained the divine eye or Dipajakku. Kumarakaspa explained that it's rather like a person who's been blind from birth, denying the existence of color. If a person is unable to see, and here we're looking at the latter part of paragraph 11, then they cannot claim to be a better witness than other people who can see perfectly well. But in the case of the heaven realms, it's like a blind person trying to claim that they know more than those who have developed the inner eye of wisdom from meditation, who are able to see the existence of the heaven realms firsthand. Why should they take the testimony seriously of someone who can't see like they can? As there are many enlightened people in the world who have been able to verify the existence of such places through the power of their meditation, it's not the case of one person's word against another, but Bayasi would need to examine the credentials of his so-called expert witnesses especially their level of virtue. So, as we have refuted the first 5 of Payasi's arguments, let's take a break halfway through and settle ourselves for 30 minutes of meditation, which today is a recent recording of a meditation entitled The Founder of Our Meditation Lineage. If at this time you would like to find a comfortable sitting position for yourself as you listen to my guidance. If you'd like to make sure that you're sitting comfortably for a meditation practice, settling yourself into a comfortable posture, either sitting on a cushion, a meditation mat, or perhaps sitting on a straight-back chair. If you're sitting cross-legged, then make sure both of your knees reach as far as the floor. Perhaps supporting yourself with blankets or towels if your knees don't quite reach. Or setting both feet flat on the floor if you're sitting on a chair. So start out with a stable tripod-like posture, and in this way, you can bring your spine up nice and tall in order to re-energize yourself. You can let the lower lumbar region relax to its natural shape and allow your hands to rest palm upwards in your lap, with the right hand over the left hand and the index finger of the right hand touching against the thumb of your left hand. Close your eyes very gently. Close your eyes gently, or just cast your gaze softly downwards to the floor in front of you, allowing your eyes to defocus. And then we do what's known as a body scan to relax all the muscles of our body. So we invite a sense of softness to our face. Allow our eyelids to soften, allowing that softness to flow down through our temples in a gentle wave. Allowing our lips to touch only very lightly together as the mouth relaxes, and letting our jawline soften. We relax our neck and let our shoulders drop to their natural height, relaxing our arms, our forearms, our hands and fingers, so that our hands rest only very lightly in our lap. Continuing on down, we relax all the muscles of our torso, chest, trunk, and throughout our core, before relaxing both legs, all the way down to our feet and our toes. Once again, making a check down through the whole of our body to make sure there are no remaining places with any stress or tension anymore. If we do find places where tension still seems to linger on, then we do our best to relax them as far as possible, until it feels as if our whole body has melted away into the atmosphere around us, leaving us with no further worries about our body anymore, and allowing us to turn our attention inward instead. So we let our attention gently peel away from the outside world. This time allowing us to relax our state of mind by putting aside any worries or concerns about our everyday life. Almost like a person with no past and no future. Entirely focused in the present moment and on the task in hand. So conjuring up a sense of well-being as if that well-being were made up of tiny particles of happiness and joy inside us. Particles of happiness and joy that seem to fill up our body and mind, growing and spreading within us, to the point that there's no space left inside us for any other sort of thought. And when we feel relaxed and refreshed, both in body and in mind, very gently and using no effort at all, we can imagine that the whole of our body is nothing but an empty space or a hollow cavity with no organs or tissues, no muscles or bones. Or inside you, you might imagine that your whole body has been transformed into a sort of transparent bubble with nothing on the inside. And when you're ready, again, very gently, using no effort at all, you might cast your mind back again to that imaginary picture of a bright, shining sun, which we had a few moments ago. Maybe yellow or golden in color, white or red. It doesn't really matter. And not being put off if the actual picture is not as clear as you normally see it with your eyes. Even if it's vague, accept it anyway. And there may be some people who feel the warmth of the sun but don't actually see it. Again, you can use that tactile sense of warmth as the object for your meditation. And in this case, we allow that bright picture or that feeling of warmth to make its way gradually downwards inside the space of our body, almost as if we were gradually breathing it down inside us to the deepest point of our breath, or gently swallowing the object down to the very pit of our stomach. Once the bright object or the sense of warmth reaches that point in our abdomen, there's no need for us to move the object anywhere else anymore. We gradually and gently maintain it with a feather-light touch at the very center of ourselves. If we find our awareness wandering away onto other things, whether it be sounds or distractions around us, each time we realize, we simply bring our attention back again to the center of the body as before. If the inner object disappears, then we can conjure up a new one, and we don't let it be a big deal. When we're new to meditation, we find our mind wanders quite often. But each time we notice its absence, we simply bring it back and it'll become a little bit easier to keep it in place the next time round. Until before long, we'll find that our awareness is spending more time centered than it does wandering, at which point we'll start to have an intuitive feeling of the mind being able to stay at the center of the body almost by second nature, and to help create a space between yourself and your thoughts. We can tap into the still small, silent spaces between the thoughts. If thoughts return, we do our best to ignore them. But if ignoring the thoughts proves ineffective, we can make use of that traditional mantra instead, using the words Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, or any other affirmation of your own that you prefer to substitute in. The more you repeat the mantra, the deeper those words will lead you toward a sense of purity in the mind, helping you to free your mind of thought. As those words resonate within your heart, within every cell, every fiber of your being, the mind will become more settled within you. So we continue in this way, lightly and gently, just for a few more moments now in silence, until we come to the appropriate time. So we continue to keep our mind gently on track at the center of the body the whole of the time, by means of our inner object, whether it's something we see or something we feel inside us. We find our mind slipping away onto other things. Each time we realize, we just bring our attention back again to the center of our body as before. If the inner object disappears, we can conjure up a new one, But if it changes, then we just follow it in its new form. At the same time, we try to keep the mind free of thought, either by ignoring any thoughts that arise, or by making use of the mantra as a way to run interference on those random thoughts. Especially today, as we find ourselves at the tail end of the annual celebration, coinciding with the full moon day of the 10th lunar month, when we like to think back to the anniversary of the rediscovery of our meditation lineage back in 1916 by a monk that many of you are familiar with, from the big black and white photo displayed prominently around our temple branches. So going back to the early 1900s, although the scriptures were still widely studied in Thailand, but the practice of meditation had slipped into disuse and was poorly understood. The meditation techniques that remained available to the Thai people were in rather a fragmented condition, rather like a pile of random spare parts that no one could assemble into a functioning car anymore. There were elements of the technique scattered around Thailand with some of the meditation masters of the time, and these corresponded to a style of practice known as Boran Gamathan, or the Southern Esoteric Buddhism, sometimes equated with the Yoga Vajra school, going back to the 16th century and probably much, much earlier than that. But in many places all over Southeast Asia, this meditation technique had slipped from living memory, often because it had been actively suppressed by competing meditation schools that enjoyed royal patronage at the time. So it was left to the great abbot of Wat Pak Nam, also known as Phra Mongkol Thepmuni, and more commonly known as Luang Pu Sot Thanissaro, put these elements back together again as the workable system of meditation that we would recognize today. So it's said that this monk had been ordained for 11 years when he decided to sit down and really put all his knowledge of meditation to the test. By sitting down without moving in the cross-legged position in his temple, initially first thing in the morning, and it was a task which led him to a great deal of discomfort, as if there were pain shooting through the whole of his body, just by maintaining his meditation posture. Nonetheless, he persevered with a technique mostly distinguished by his use of the mantra Samma Arahang, until suddenly, at a certain point in his practice, all the pain suddenly disappeared, and the whole focus of his attention seemed to come together automatically at the center of himself. And the strange thing was that there was a sphere of light that appeared there that looked rather like a crystal ball, which stayed with him no matter what he did, not only while he was meditating, but even as he got up to do other things. He realized that there must be more than just the crystal ball within himself. And again that night he sat down to practice, pulling a meditation all-nighter, where one sits in meditation the whole night long until dawn, again with the crystal sphere at the center of himself, finding himself becoming more and more calm at the center of that sphere, finding a middle way at the center of the sphere, leading to deeper and deeper meditation experiences, until by the time the morning came, he had attained what's known as the body of enlightenment within himself. with an appearance rather like a living Buddha statue made of crystal. And the sense of peace and happiness arising from the attainment that he'd never experienced from practicing any other of the meditation techniques available to him made him confident that this was a new path of meditation practice, previously unknown to his generation. And as a result of this attainment, he started to teach this inner pathway of practice more widely, often summarizing the technique with the words that stillness is the key to success, meaning that stillness of the mind, when the mind has overcome all the movement caused by the thoughts, it will allow the mind to go deeper at the center. So the sense of stillness in the mind isn't something that you can force or manufacture, but is something that arises naturally when the thoughts have gradually settled down into silence, leading to a sense of peace within that can reach out for peace in the world. And since the great abbot was quite ambitious with his practice, meditating seriously, and encouraging his students to do the same, reaching towards the subtle truths of the universe through the practice of what's known as meditation research. In this connection, he is famous for setting up a meditation workshop in his own temple of Wat Phra, where there was perpetual meditation by dedicated teams, 24 hours a day. A place where monks and nuns could gather together in order to research meditation in shifts, meditating as a team to unveil the mysteries of the universe. As a result of these innovations by the great abbot, he hoped not just personally to reach an end of suffering, but to end suffering at its source for the benefit of all living beings, by vanquishing what are known as maras, or the factors in the subconscious that create the suffering in the first place. The great abbot was also known to be very forward-looking during his lifetime, being the first monk in Thailand to allow the ordination of non-Thais into the monastic community, with a monk called Kapilavattho from the United Kingdom, who ordained in 1954, and who was later followed by a whole group of other Western monks and nuns, joining the monastic community and eventually being sent back to teach meditation in Western societies towards the end of the 1950s. So reflecting on the roots of our own tradition in this way, as we continue to apply our mind lightly and gently at the center of the body, we follow on with our own practice for a few more moments in silence until we come to time for some loving kindness meditation. So we continue to keep our mind on track at the center of the body the whole of the time, lightly, gently, and continuously, always at the center of whatever inner experience we've built up for ourselves as the result of the meditation so far today. We allow all the positive energy accumulated from our meditation to expand outward from our center, along with that peace energy, softly expanding outward as loving kindness, initially toward ourselves, with a sense of compassion for ourselves, a sense of going easy on ourselves for a change, wishing ourselves to be free of suffering and to know only happiness. Before expanding that sense of peace energy further beyond ourselves, outwards into the room around us, wider to the whole building, the whole neighborhood, to all the living beings around us without exception. Expanding peace energy outwards to all those living beings with the wish that they be well and happy, free from suffering, live together in peace and harmony. And we extend a tide of loving kindness further outwards to the whole of our city, cleansing away all negativity in its path, reaching out to the whole country, and expanding further still until it reaches the whole of the world in all directions all around, outwards into the universe, extending that sense of positivity and peace energy to every place, with the wish that all beings be well and happy, enjoy happiness, success, fulfillment of all their wholesome wishes, to be free from harm or danger, from suffering and disease, to be free from conflict or negativity. We can extend our loving kindness toward particular loved ones or those who we know are going through difficult times by holding them dear at the center of ourselves. We might extend loving kindness towards those for whom we feel a particular debt of gratitude, to those still living, or even those who have already passed on. We might even think back to the great abbot of Wat Phra Nam, who rediscovered our meditation technique with a sense of gratitude, extending positive energy as we continue to bring this meditation lineage to a new generation for the last few moments of our practice together. Sappa Putthanupa-vena, Sappa Dhammanupa-vena, Sappa Sanghanupa-vena Sattha Soti Avantu Te. So if you'd like to come to the end of your meditation for today, you can gradually open your eyes again. If you feel at all uncomfortable, then slowly try changing to a more comfortable position before gradually finishing your practice. So to pick up where we left off, halfway through the refutation of Hayasi's so-called proof for his wrong views, and before I continue, I should indicate, for those who might find it uncomfortable listening, that over the next 10 minutes I will be mentioning the word suicide and experiments that are inhumane. So to continue now, without missing a beat, Prince Payasi already had a 6th argument up his sleeve. So here we're looking at paragraph 12. He reasoned that if heaven existed, then monks would certainly be the first to go there because they had done more good deeds than everyone else during their life. If heaven really existed and was everything it was cranked up to be, then those monks should be in a hurry to get to heaven. So you'd see monks committing suicide to get there quicker. And maybe what Payasi didn't consider is that the longer someone stays as a monk, the higher level of heaven that they could go to, because as a monk they would collect up more and more good deeds throughout their life the longer they lived, and the accumulated merits would sustain them in higher levels of heaven for longer. So obviously there are little details like this which Prince Payasi didn't realize. And here we're looking at paragraph 13. As usual, Kumarakasppa was able to refute Payasi's argument with a parable about squandering the value of something by rushing to get proof for its existence. So this issue was something rather close to Kumarakasppa's own heart, because ill-disposed monks had threatened his own mother with the same brand of impatience when she was carrying him. They wanted to rely on hearsay rather than evidence. Kumarakasppa's refutation was that supposing there is a mother who has a son from her previous marriage, and she remarries and gets pregnant by the new husband. If the unborn child is female, then by Indian law in those days, her half-brother would still get half the inheritance, even though he is not a direct relation of the new father. However, if the new child born were male, then he would be disinherited. So if it's a daughter, he gets some share of the inheritance, but if it's a son, he'll be left penniless when his mother dies. If the half-brother was in a real hurry to know the sex of the unborn child, if he decided to perform a quick invasive surgery on his mother to find out the gender of his new younger sibling, because in the olden days they didn't have things like x-rays, ultrasound, or aseptic operating conditions, the result of his untimely curiosity would be that both the baby and the mother would die. So although he would get the information he was looking for, but the act of seeking the answer would have nullified the reason he wanted the information in the first place. In the same way, monks would not want to commit suicide to rush to see what heaven was like, because they ruin the positive near-death intention that would bring them to heaven in the first place, which is dying with a wholesome state of mind. If you're confused enough to want to kill yourself, then it's not a state of mind which is going to lead you to a fortunate realm when you pass away. It's wrong action, basically murder, but it's murdering yourself. So it's a double whammy of bad action, because it's you who gets saddled with the karmic retribution of committing murder, and you're also the victim. This is why in the Vinaya, even monks who encourage others to commit suicide are considered guilty of murder too. So those like the Samaritans who encourage others not to commit suicide are doing really valuable work, in the estimation of Buddhists anyway. The king's opinions weren't so easily curbed, however, and he presented a 7th argument based on an experiment which he conducted to find out whether body and soul, or body and mind, are two distinct things that separated death. His empirical method to test the assumption was that when a person dies, their soul or their mind will be released from the body. And here we're looking at paragraph 14. To make sure a person dies under controlled experimental conditions, Prince Payasi had a prisoner who was condemned to death anyway, and instead of just chopping off their head, he had them boiled to death in an airtight vessel, with the idea that as soon as the lid was opened after the prisoner's death, If some sort of soul or mind existed separately from the body, it would be seen to escape as soon as the lid was lifted. But, cut to the chase, they opened up the lid and nothing was seen to escape from the airtight vessel. So Payasi cited this as proof that there is no mind-body duality. And if there is no mind separate from the body, then you would be better off spending your time bodybuilding than trying to train your mind in meditation. And now we are looking at paragraph 15, but again, Kumarakaspar had a parable by which to refute Prince Payasi's logic, which was to suppose that when you're dreaming, some part of you is projected in a way that allows you to see this or that country, maybe countries over the sea, while your body is immobile on your bed. So when you're asleep, while your body is lying completely still in your bed, some other part of you is traveling on a trip around the world, getting new experiences while you dream. Kumarakaspar asked if any of the prince's courtiers had ever seen that dreaming part of the king escaping from his bedchamber when they opened his door at night. Since the king admitted that no one had reported seeing his astral projection, Kumarakaspar concluded that in a similar way, although such a thing must exist, you can't expect a person's mental component or spirit after death to be visible to the naked eye. So we come to Prince Payasi's next objection, which reminds me a little bit about the 2003 movie called 21 Grams. The idea for the movie actually came from a flawed experiment by a guy called Duncan McDougall, published in 1907 in Haverhill, Massachusetts, that the body loses 3/4 of an ounce in weight, so 21 grams, immediately after death. So if 21 grams goes missing after death, then this must equate with the weight of the soul of the dearly departed. And here we are looking at paragraph 16. So following the same logic, about 2,000 years earlier, in characteristic style, Prince Payasi thought, well, let's try putting a condemned prisoner on a set of scales, and then strangle them, and measure the weight difference afterwards. Payasi found that there was no difference in weight before and after death. Prince Payasi thought that this was proof that no soul existed or departed the body at death. And here we're looking at paragraph 17. Again, Kumarakaspar refuted Payasi's argument, saying that he'd been wasting his time strangling thieves on scales in such a way because the body gets heavier, not lighter, after death. Any object that grows cold weighs more than it did when it was still warm. That's why it's hard for assassins to move the dead weight of corpses around. Kumarakaspar cited the weight of a piece of iron, which has been heated up and then let cool down. Actually, it becomes denser on the scales. So the main point here is that if there is a spirit or a soul or whatever, then you're not going to be able to find out about its existence by weighing it, because it's not made out of physical material. It's something immaterial or ethereal. So it's like looking for the wrong sort of evidence. For Payasi's next argument, which is the 9th if you've been keeping count, he actually went looking for the place in the body where the soul might reside. And here we're looking at paragraph 18. So first using a cadaver and later a live subject, he performed his dissection, removing body organs piece by piece, trying to locate the seat of the soul in the body. So maybe it's in the heart, maybe it's in the brain, but even by such a process of elimination, they found they'd removed all the remaining organs of an unfortunate prisoner's body, and they still couldn't find the place the soul relied upon. So here we're looking at paragraph 19. Again, Kumarakaspar had a parable to refute this particular line of reasoning, and it's a story about a musician with a conch. So they used to use conch shells before trumpets were invented, and if you blew into one end, then it made a loud trumpeting noise. So said musician went into the middle of a jungle where no one had ever been to the seaside before with his conch, and he blew it once and then put it on the ground and went away. All the tribal people came out and they looked at the conch and they rattled it and they turned it upside down and they tapped on it, but they couldn't find out where the sound had come from, because it was not self-explanatory how the sound and the conch were related. Because what you need to make the sound come out of the conch is a knowledgeable person to blow into one end of it. In the same way, you cannot explain why you have a mind in a body just by looking at the body itself. And this is one reason why in Western science we have so many problems in explaining aspects of the mind as opposed to the nervous system, because most traditional knowledge of anatomy comes from the study of cadavers, not from looking at how living people function at body temperature, with the warmth and vapors in the body, and so on. Western anatomy only studies these things from bodies that are already deceased, so they only know the mechanics and the plumbing. What you might equate with Arthur Koestler's Ghost in the Machine remains a mystery to Western science. And here, we're looking at paragraph 21. Just for good measure, Kumarakaspar had a backup parable about a matted-hair fire worshipper who, like the ignorant tribesmen, had tried to take apart a pile of firewood to find out where the fire had come from. By this point in the debate, Prince Piyasi already knew he had been defeated, but the reason he wouldn't concede defeat by Kumarakaspar was fear of embarrassment. He agreed with everything which Kumarakaspar was trying to teach him, and realized the flimsiness of his own evidence, but he had run up against the major problem of changing his mind. And here we're looking at paragraph 22. Piyasi was afraid of ridicule, to be seen to make a U-turn in his professed beliefs. Knowing this, Kumarakaspar gave a further 4 parables about the harm coming from intransigence in the face of wisdom. They all basically give examples of why change can be beneficial. So I won't go into these in full detail, but in brief, we have the parable of the 2 desert caravans, the parable of the dung porter, the parable of the dice players, and the parable of the foragers. And here we're looking at paragraph 23. The first parable on intransigence is about a caravan of merchants who were traveling across a desert who believed the advice from a guy they'd never met before: throw away all their heavy supplies of drinking water so they could make it to the next oasis as quickly as possible. All of them eventually died of thirst in the desert because their advisor had set out to lure them to their deaths. So just because a person offers you advice doesn't mean that that advice is necessarily good. You should reflect on advice and do your due diligence, especially if your life relies on the advice. Next, we are looking at paragraphs 24 and 25. The second parable on intransigence is about a man who found some pig dung in the forest. So pig droppings are not worthless. You can use them for manure. This guy filled up a whole burlap sack of free pig dung and started to carry it back home to his village on his shoulders. Along the way, it started to rain, and all the pig dung washed out of the sack, and by the time he got back to the village, he was smothered from head to foot in pig dung, rendering it worthless, not to speak of the unpleasant odor. Instead of just leaving the pig dung in the forest and returning for it when the weather was better, this is an example of the harm that comes from clinging onto something that is not necessarily beneficial. The third parable on intransigence, and here we're looking at paragraphs 26 and 27, is about 2 strange guys who used to gamble with dice. So the one who threw the higher score would win the bet. One guy was a bad loser, so every time he'd lost, he'd swallow the offending dice to destroy the evidence. Eventually, his opponent was so frustrated that they painted poison on the dice, and next time the guy lost, he poisoned himself. So the gambler died basically because he could not face up to reality. Fourth parable on intransigence, and here we're looking at paragraphs 28 and 29, concerns 2 friends who went foraging in the forest. The first thing which the friends found in the forest was hemp threads. So both of them loaded up with as much hemp thread as they could carry, and they continued on their journey home, and along the way they came across a pile of hemp cloth. The more intelligent friend discarded the hemp threads and loaded up on the more valuable hemp cloth instead. The less intelligent friend said, "Oh, I already carried these hemp threads a long way. It's a pity to discard them now." So the 2 friends continued on the way, one with a sack of hemp cloth and the other with a sack of hemp threads. Along the way, they came across successively more valuable forage: flax, threads, linen cloth, cotton, from threads, cloth, iron, copper, tin, lead, silver, and eventually gold. Each time the sensible friend uptraded for the more valuable forage. But the less intelligent friend had the same excuse about having carried the hemp threads a long way already. Eventually, the two of them arrived back at their home village, and all the villagers came out to welcome them. They praised the intelligent friend for finding gold and mocked the less intelligent friend for choosing hemp threads. Because the latter was attached to the first thing he found, he lost out. In just the same way, Prince Piyasi had availed himself of a whole lot of views about the world simply because they were the first views which he'd come across. But if he'd been a more sensible person, if later he had come across views that were more accurate, he should not have been embarrassed to uptrade. And this was a point where Prince Piyasi actually gave in. The result of the whole sutta was that Prince Piyasi declared that from that time onwards, he would like to be a follower of the teachings of the Buddha and relinquished his wrong views. He requested to take refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and to be regarded as a lay person in Buddhism for the rest of his life. So here we're looking at paragraph 30. Part of what Piyasi did in support of Buddhism for the remainder of his life was to delegate one of his attendants, called Uttara the Brahmin, to organize food in support of the monastic community. So here we're talking about paragraph 32. When Uttara organized food himself, he made sure it was of the finest quality. When Piyasi organized it himself, it was of mediocre quality because, although Piyasi understood that generosity was a good thing to practice, he didn't offer food out of faith, unlike Uttara. The result was that at the end of his life, Piyasi was born in the first level of heaven as an earth sprite or Pumadeva, with a mansion called Sarisaka near a tree, where the sprite had the duty of guiding desert travelers. Meanwhile, his attendant, Uttara, was born with a huge 120-mile-high heavenly mansion in the second level of heaven. So here we're looking at paragraphs 33 and 34. The difference between the two was discovered by a monk called Gawampati Thera. So apart from supporting the importance of right view, this sutta gives the idea of a higher rebirth coming from support for the Sangha, where alms are given out of faith and respect. So what I've described today has been a sutta about Prince Piyasi, who was a prototypical scientist or empiricist trying to find out about metaphysical matters. It's particularly interesting because it deals with many aspects of metaphysics, heaven, hell, and all the things invisible to the naked eye. What we see from this particular sutta is that although it may be hard to get proof for these metaphysical phenomena by scientific means, it doesn't mean that there's no proof available. However, the way to find proof for these things is by a slightly different subjective methodology. What we are doing when we study about meditation and about ourselves on a deeper level is, in fact, scientific in a way as well, but it's not exactly empirical or repeatable. It is scientific in as far as we repeatedly try to explore subjective aspects of our own inner experience. And it's something which no one else can do in our place. We can't get some research institute to carry out the research for us. It is something which each of us has to do for ourselves. Unfortunately, we don't have someone like Kumarakaspa to knock down each of our arguments concerning wrong view, but firsthand we can go step by step through the practice of meditation to evaluate the arguments and the truth or otherwise of each worldview in a way that will lead us to undeniable understanding. If someone else tells you, even in the most convincing way, about the existence of heaven or hell, the previous life or the next, it would be very hard to believe them more than 99% of the time, even if they're the most convincing person in the world. But if you're able to examine these things firsthand, then this will be much more compelling than other people's opinions, and would be a much more satisfactory way to learn about the nature of life, the mind-body divide, and what happens to us beyond the realm of death. So this is one example of how we can work with proof in Buddhism from the point of view of dialogue. The second thought is that historically more recent schools of Buddhist philosophy, sometimes known as the mind only or Yogacara, not to be confused with Yoga Vachara, claim that heaven and hell are nothing more than states of consciousness. When we are happy, then even without dying, we are already in heaven. When we are going through a bad patch in our lives because of the mental torment, then that's when we are in hell. But what we learn from the Payasi Sutta, and perhaps from other places in the early Buddhist scriptures, is complacent to think that states of mind are all there is at the expense of phenomena such as heaven or hell as realms of existence. For sure, we experience ups and downs in life, so that some days we will feel more cheerful than others. But that doesn't mean you've actually been to heaven and hell, because once you reach the end of this life, when your quality of mind suddenly becomes much more important than while it was contained in your body, because your body is dead and buried, then there are not only states of mind, but there are states of existence where we have to go and stay for a long, long time, where that state of mind becomes our state of being. That is why we can't afford to be reckless about thinking that heaven and hell can be disregarded as figments of the imagination. However, if you do have doubts, like Prince Payasi did, about the existence of these realms to the extent that you think there's no point in doing good deeds in your life, because it won't make any difference to where you go after you die, then perhaps you should just do good deeds anyway for the good it brings you in society between now and the end of your life. If heaven and hell are not the best motivator for you, at least think about how you're treating others in the world in order to uphold human dignity and so on. That should be a good enough reason for you to do good things in your life. And as for whether heaven and hell are really realms of existence or not, at least when you come to the point in your life when you're in a position to judge it firsthand, the goodness you've stored up for yourself will not be wasted if it turns out that heaven and hell actually do exist. So today's sutta has perhaps given you a newfound awareness of how old empirical thinking occurred in human history, but at the same time the importance of being a good friend both to yourself and others in the sense of encouraging right view. It's especially important for those in positions of spiritual leadership, and really no less important for anyone with the authority to make decisions about the welfare of the wider community. So for today, we've been looking at the Payasi Sutta. For my next live session online, which will, fingers crossed, be a week on Sunday morning, we move on to look at the Aganya Sutta, which is a teaching about the Buddhist version of Genesis. For good measure, I'd like to remind viewers that you can email your questions about meditation and what you've heard in the lecture to the email address that you can see spelled out in the slide. And I'll do my best to answer these on my next session. In the meantime, try to avoid recklessness or complacency as we continue to deal with the knock-on health and economic effects of the pandemic. Maintain a positive mood, speak only positive words, forgive others, extend good wishes to others, and meditate daily. Hopefully, as a result of today's session, you will be able to cultivate right view and not be fooled into thinking that science has the answers to everything. So, this is me, Phra Nicholas Thanissaro, signing off for now. So long, folks, and stay safe.